Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am Chair of the APA's New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today, Friday, May 17th, we will be hearing the presentation, Planning for and in the Federal Government, a New Perspective. There we go. Hey, for technical help during today's webcast, you can head over to support.logmeinc.com/go-to-webinar, and you'll be able to get helpful tips and tricks and phone numbers should you still have technical issues. For your content questions related to today's presentation, just type those in the questions box at any time in your webcast toolbar, and we will answer those questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And we do have quite a few speakers today, so just to help me out, if you could please, in your question, include which speaker you'd like to have answer that question, that would help me, so thank you. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2019. Thanks to all those sponsoring for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. Today's session in particular is sponsored by the National Capital Area chapter of APA. So thanks to them for getting this session together. Coming up on your screen now is a list of our upcoming webcasts. You can check that list out and register for our webcast at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing. And to log those credits, head over to planning.org, log into your MyAPA account, and from there up on the search bar, you can either enter in the title of today's webcast or the event number, both of which can be found on ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our sessions, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hey, we have over 2,500 subscribers and over 300 videos for you to watch. So just head over to facebook.com/planningwebcast or youtube.com/planningwebcast to be friends with us. All right, that's the end of my intro. I am now going to turn it over to Clark to get us started.
Thank you, Christine. Good day, everyone, and happy Bike to Work Day. As Christine said, my name is Clark Larson, and I am the Professional Development Officer for the National Capital Area Chapter and a planner with the City of Rockville in Maryland. Thank you all for joining us on this webinar. Today, we're going to hear from our 4 experienced planners who are working in what we consider non-traditional planning roles and in and for the federal government. I would be surprised if we hear the word zoning in any of their presentations, though I do like surprises, so we'll see. Our first presenter is Eric McAfee. Eric is an AICP planner with over 15 years of planning experience. Eric has worked for FEMA in Louisiana and currently works for Alliance US, which is a consulting firm that performs planning studies for federal agencies around the country and overseas. Our next presenter will be Jenna Jackson, AICP. She's a planner with over 15 years of experience working for and with the federal government. She's worked in Japan, Hawaii, and Washington State for several federal agencies, performing a variety of functions, including master planning. She currently works for HUD in San Francisco. James Garland is the team leader for the Planning Capacity Building Program in the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty. James has 17 years of multimodal planning experience on the transportation planning process. He's managed the SHRP2 capacity program with a $25 million budget, and prior to this, he was a New Starts team leader with FTA, where he led the development of rail projects in Los Angeles, Portland, San Diego, and Seattle. James is a member of APA, serves on TRB's Standing Committee on Metropolitan Policy, Planning, and Programming, and is the chair of TRB's Subcommittee on Mega Regions. And last but not least, Reilly Abbott is a planner with 14 years experience in the democracy, human rights, and governance sector of international development. Reilly works at the USAID, Agency for International Development, Global Development Lab, where he promotes and advances approaches that engage diverse stakeholders in dialogue and collaboration to address complex issues, including community safety, food security, and drug dependency in resource-poor cities and regions. So all these people have a lot of experience behind them, and I hope they'll share it with you today. Now that you know a little bit about our presenters, I'll hand it off to Eric. Eric, take it away. And
Thanks, Clark.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm there. Thanks, Clark. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Eric McAfee. I work for the company Alliance Consulting Group, which, though a private agency, has just about all of its contracts based with relations to the federal government. I am the planning lead and project manager for this small biz. It's based in Alexandria, Virginia. And obviously the photo seen in this opening slide is a little ways away from Alexandria, Virginia. And I will concede that it is not necessarily directly a photo related to my current employment, but it could be, and so it's still relevant. This is actually a photo of Mazar-e Sharif, the base closest to Mazar-e Sharif in northern Afghanistan. That was another one of my major federal-related projects that I engaged in, living there as a civilian master planner from 2010 to 2012. So essentially my three largest federal planning responsibilities have had some gaps between them. So I've kind of alternated between federal work and non-federal work. And I'm going to only gloss over the first two, the first being, as Clark mentioned, FEMA in Louisiana, the second being the Afghanistan project, for which we see the photo here, and then the third being my current work with Alliance Consulting Group, which I'll be exploring in the greatest level of detail. I cannot show some of the output of the first two projects, the FEMA and Afghanistan work, because those are for official use only. And so my apologies, there'd be some interesting graphics to depict, so I'll have to just keep it to a descriptor. And I'll gloss over those again, since there isn't much to show for them visually. And then if people have questions, I'm happy to divulge more at that point. At any rate, I lived in New Orleans. It was my first job after planning school. Moved there a year before the unpleasantness of Hurricane Katrina. And within a year, we obviously had one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in most people's recent memory. And though I had not been working in anything remotely related to emergency management or natural disaster relief at that point, the events on that day in August did pretty much thrust many planners into that line of work. And I first worked as a contractor for a private company that dealt with long-term solutions for housing solutions in the greater New Orleans area, essentially relocating people whose homes were affected by the storm. And after about 9 months of that, I did work for about a year and a half directly with FEMA as a core employee, first in their geospatial intelligence unit, where we engaged in a variety of mapping needs to serve disaster recovery at that point, and then later in the implementation support, essentially trying to help meet further unmet needs beyond those that were being initially satisfied through public assistance and individual assistance, which are the two main forms of recovery-based assistance that FEMA engages in after natural disasters. So I worked for that up until about mid to late 2007. Took a break to go back to school and engaged in some other work, largely emergency management related, though not federal. And then in 2010, I worked with Afghanistan. Actually, I worked for a private company again that directly served the U.S. Air Force and engaged in master planning on that base in northern Afghanistan. Incidentally, I was assigned to a German base in RC North. That's where I worked the majority of my time, though I did spend some time in Bagram and some time in Kandahar, and largely engaged in facilities planning, developing light and ultralight master plans, as well as some mapping for landmine clearance, keeping track of areas that had been gone through the full vetting and clearance of landmines. It was essentially the typical consulting work, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, living in a tent like the one seen in this photo, and working with a variety of both civilians and mostly Air Force personnel, and many of them either active duty or reservists, and then some state guard, and was there for a total of, I believe, 17 months, working in a variety of different capacities to serve facilities planning. Took some time off with other jobs after that, and then back in 2017, started working for Alliance Consulting Group, where I am to this day. Finally going to have a slide change here. See if we can get that to work. Okay. Most of our projects, as I indicated before, are federal contracts. The majority of them are military related, though they aren't necessarily installations. Here's one of the biggest projects I've been working on since starting at Alliance Consulting Group. It is for the Real Property Master Plan for Arlington National Cemetery. It is an ongoing concern for our nation's sacred shrine right across the river from the Lincoln Memorial, and that it is consistently dealing with spatial issues and running out of room to continue to honor those who served. It is an ongoing consideration, and as you can most likely tell from this working map, that the facility, the premises of Arlington are all in green, and the surrounding area, which may not show up terribly well, but you can see some kind of figure ground gray space, including, as you'll see right here, the Pentagon, that all of those indicators are that there's very little more room for the base to grow, or for the cemetery to grow. We are dealing with strategies on how to both maximize use of what little space remains, as well as coming up with improved or more stringent eligibility standards to help extend the life of the cemetery. Without these standards and without these changes, the cemetery is likely to reach complete capacity in about 20 to 25 years. One of the projects we also engage in is ways to improve the visitor experience. And for those who can't quite read the text, this is a very interesting framework plan that uses within the cemetery what just about any student of planning would be familiar with, the 5 basics to Kevin Lynch's image of a city. And we worked with the districts, edges, landmarks, nodes, and paths, those 5 components, to essentially address the aspects of how people read and interpret their way through this landscape. And we asked a variety of different subject matter experts and developed kind of an aggregation of their opinions through this map, essentially helping us organize the space into clusters that determine what are the most commonly traveled paths, what are the true edges between perhaps the older and the newer parts of the cemetery, and then what are some of the core districts, areas that have a certain unifying either visual character or organizational structure. And this is are ways that we're helping to better understand what to capitalize on for the cemetery's assets, and then what areas might be underrepresented in terms of visitors, and how to make those areas possibly spread the visual interest and touristic interest across a broader array. Another consideration that we have to deal with is the phasing of the burials. This cemetery deals amazingly with approximately 20 to 30 burials every day, 6 days a week. So we're dealing with over 100 burials a week. And the intent is for these military funeral services to have an orderly procession that does not impinge upon one another, so that one individual can be honored and not have to deal with the sounds of perhaps a bugler or a rifle shot impinging upon the others. And so there's a strategy for how to deal with the remaining spaces that still have vacancy, and phase them across so that there's as little disruption as possible. And so from this map, you can pretty much see what's left, relatively little. The areas in the, I guess you'd say, the northwest here, this is the Millennium expansion. It is a recent expansion that has allowed for the cemetery to grow. It's only likely to buy about 6 or 7 additional years to the cemetery. This is still part of the core of the cemetery, the one remaining area that still has some levels of vacancy. And then as my cursor is circling this bottom part, this is the recent southern expansion that has not yet become absorbed into the cemetery, though the land has by and large transferred. For those who know the area or need a point of reference, the Air Force Memorial, a major landmark in Arlington County, is right here where my cursor is circling. And so the goal is to basically look at the remaining cemetery sections and figure out how to sequence them and structure them to continue to promote an orderly sequence of burials that is essentially well choreographed and elegant and respectful as possible. Continuing on to another radically different project, this one in an actual military installation, we're engaged in a traffic impact study in Aberdeen Proving Ground, which is just northeast of Baltimore, Maryland. And this large installation is also butts up against a major expansion of logistics and shipping, a huge warehousing district just outside of the edge of the proving grounds. And a goal is to mitigate traffic for all of the tractor trailers that are coming in and out of this ever-growing ever-growing warehouse district, we could say. It's much related to major retailers that have a presence in the Northeast, and how to integrate the traffic as seamlessly as possible with the coming ingress and egress of the large numbers of personnel that work at Aberdeen. And so the right-hand side represents the shaded edge of the proving grounds, and then the rest is the outside of the perimeter. We had 3 different proposed alternatives for a road to ease the tension for tractor trailers, and the goal was to engage in speculative studies in terms of the level of service that each will help promote in terms of traffic reductions across these 3 scenarios. And I will concede that we at Alliance do not have the expertise to engage in these studies. My suspicion is that that would be much more along James Garland's wheelhouse. But we do have the capacity to make the maps. And so we partnered with another consultant who engaged in the traffic analysis, and we worked with them to build the maps, and then we engaged in some land acquisition analysis for this project. One of the largest projects that's taken some time, and this ugly slide that I will quickly go through, is a project up at West Point, the U.S. Military Academy, which is engaged in a comprehensive upgrade of all of their academic buildings to basically bring them up to speed and make them as competitive as possible with some of the other top-tier private schools in the Northeast, such as many of the Ivy League schools. And this was a new challenge for me as a planner, is that I had to build a risk register, which is a common strategy for project management, particularly as it relates to construction. And I'm going to zoom in on a portion of this risk register so that it's easier to read and interpret and give everyone else a better idea of what exactly this entails. It really is looking at the life cycle of both the conception, solicitation, pre-award, construction, and closeout to all of these projects, all of the different academic buildings at West Point. And we're looking at risks and the likelihood that something will happen, and then the means of trying to mitigate or solve those problems. And so this is merely a corner of that vast chart from the previous slide, but it is identifying some of the key issues at the start of the project that could throw a wrench in the overall process. And it's essentially built on brainstorming and then coming up with an assessment of risk. It's not exactly a science by any stretch of the imagination, but it's built on a comprehensive, thoughtful look at the full scale of what could happen and what could go wrong over the course of this extensive renovation process. I had some help, but I did develop most of it while working with other team members, schedulers, and other architects and engineers in order to develop all of these different scenarios and determine how to respond to each of them. This project recently concluded, and we're now basically dealing with the final edits to this understanding and validating the entire process by which West Point will engage in renovating all of its buildings while retaining their historic integrity and trying to, as much as possible, promote a core quality of life for all the cadets that are enrolled there. This is a 25-year time horizon that we're dealing with here. So it's a monumental amount of intervention over a pretty extensive time frame. And that really covers an array of the different projects that I've worked on. I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton over to Jenna Jackson, who will pick up the next, the next chapter.
Thank you, Eric, for your informative presentation. That was really interesting, and I particularly want to thank you for your service supporting our troops and for protecting one of our nation's most important sacred shrines, Arlington National Cemetery. So thank you very much for that. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Yes? Okay, so we'll move forward. So my name is Jenna Jackson. I'm the Asset Management Division Director for HUD in San Francisco, California. And I have about 15 years of experience in planning in general, but I have 11 years of experience, actually come December to 11 years experience as a federal government employee. And rather than walk you through a few specifics in a snapshot of time in my career, demonstrating how I've used my planning degree to provide value to the United States government and the American taxpayer, I thought it'd be more useful to talk with you about some themes that I've seen in my career, give you a high-level overview of the type of planning and planning-related work I've done at various agencies, and provide a little sage advice for from a mid-career person to folks new to federal planning or looking for federal government employment opportunities. In my career, there have been some resounding themes that have been instrumental in moving my career forward. First, I want to make sure people understand your planning degree will help you be successful if you apply the techniques that you've learned while working in the federal government. Many times the application is not linear and it requires some creativity. With that in mind, I really try and encourage people to find work that moves you because you will add value if you do that. Change in the federal government is constant. Our leadership changes often, and depending on what agency you're in, it can be drastic change. And depending on who's sitting in the White House, it could be even more drastic. So change management is really important. Get good at it, and understanding what change your leadership is willing to invest in is incredibly important. So as you can see by this timeline, I've worked as a contractor for a few years before I started working for the federal government. I felt these early career years were important in exposing me to a diverse portfolio of work. This diversity of work also made the transition to working for the United States Marine Corps and the Navy pretty seamless. My experience with process improvement and managing building data and databases helped me make the leap to GSA, Public Building Service, and continue to apply the conglomeration of my planning education with facilities management and process improvement education helped me make the leap to my current leadership position with HUD. Oh, I should also mention that I was very fortunate to be appointed to the commissioner position with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission pretty recently. And for me, that's my dream gig right there, looking at how here in the Bay we can meld together transportation improvements with much sorely needed affordable housing production. So jumping into the earliest of my federal government work as a federal government employee, I worked for the Marine Corps at the Marine Corps Air-Ground Combat Center in 29 Palms as a community analyst. This job was the closest job I've had to what I think a traditional advocacy planner might be. So 29 Palms is the premier Marine Air-Ground Task Force center in our nation, meaning you can go outside at night and see lights falling from the sky, and it's not stars, it's Marines jumping from planes. The windows rattling is often a sign of live fire training exercises underway, and probably involves a bomb. We gathered, analyzed, and presented information to the community plans and liaison officer on any land-based initiatives happening in abutting counties and cities that may impact the Marines' ability to train the way they fight in the Middle East. We analyzed and presented information to our leadership on general plan updates, zoning land use changes, and their impacts on everything from helicopter routes to transportation plans, on how they might impact military caravans, to the impact of development on environmental corridor protection, as increased development herds the bees, bunnies, and desert tortoises to open spaces on the base. And in California, particularly in the desert, we spent a lot of time looking at water resource issues. Water aquifers are a hot topic. So we attended a lot of water board meetings, and we updated encroachment planning documents and recommended projects for land acquisition or other mitigation tactics to ensure the external developments around the base were compatible with the base and its mission. At MCS Iwakuni, that's Marine Corps Air Station Iwakuni, my position was more of a traditional base community planner position with a twist. The traditional base planner involves doing basic facility requirements. That's how much space does a person or activity need to be able to satisfy the mission it supports, to site approvals, which I liken to the planning review process and even a planning commission process, to NFAD's real property accountability, which is the single authoritative data store for all of the Navy's land assets data, to air installation compatible use zone updates. That's ensuring that land uses and air uses are compatible to master plan updates. The twist in my position was that at the time, a base in Okinawa was going to be closing, and MCS Iwakuni would be the receiver of much of its weapon systems, personnel, and family members. So this program is called the Defense Program Realignment Initiative, DPRI, and the base reclaim land from a neighboring hilltop to extend the base out into the ocean and build a new runway on this reclaimed land. The goal was not only to increase the logistics capacity of the strategic base, but also to reduce the noise from aircraft in the city. We created the master plan with the help of Japanese and American funds, and anybody working for the government, you know how hard it is to mix our own funds. And so you imagine bringing in foreign dollars to redevelop a base. It was a Herculean effort, but it did result in 90% of the base being redeveloped. And there were incredible amounts of charrettes going on at the time on a weekly basis, with an incredible amount of coordination and negotiating happening between local and national Japanese and American officials. At NAFAC Hawaii, I took on a leadership role managing the Geo Readiness Center and asset utilization team at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. This is when those GIS classes from UW-Milwaukee and countless map-making days at Group 70 International, in Hawaii, had an opportunity to shine through. Under my leadership, our team reimbursable accounts increased twofold. We helped our base stakeholders better tell stories using GIS maps. We even supported the Pearl Harbor dredging plan using GIS analysis. My other team were responsible for being the stewards of all the land-based data for the Navy and the Hawaiian Islands. It's with this position that I was provided the opportunity to learn formally about process improvement, Lean Six Sigma, and knowledge management strategies. We were able to streamline the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam digging permit process, as well as create a tiger team to address process gaps in our fire-related programs. Fire is a financial improvement assertion readiness. If anybody works for the government, no one wants to hear about fire. It's a crazy but important audit process. Because I love DPRI so much, I had another extent working the MILCOM projects for DPRI in Honolulu. From this job, my baby was setting up the configuration control board for the program. This was how we managed the change in our programs, specifically in our processes, and created consensus-based decisions on how we would move forward. So I used a lot of the change management, Lean Six Sigma skill sets while working with the Navy. I used them in this context to help our program vet decisions and make timely decisions with the appropriate stakeholders and leadership at the table. So from there, I went to General Services Administration, GSA, in Auburn, Washington. I project managed a 169-acre GSA Auburn Complex Disposal Project with numerous tenant relocations. And we all know how much moving sucks. Well, try moving some of your friends that you work with and not being able to tell them where they're going to go and exactly how long it's going to take because you're under the planning process and you need to gather all this information before you can start making decisions. This was a really awesome project. And we relocated several large agencies, including our office, Department of Veteran Affairs, Department of Homeland Security, and Social Security Administration, which was a prospectus level project, into lease space. And I actually used a lot of the alternative analysis techniques that I learned at UWM in some of our classes with vetting our analysis and presenting that analysis all the way up the chain to leadership to get concurrence on these big moves. So under my leadership, we also stood up multi-divisional process improvements. And they're listed up here. So I'm going to go through them. So I think I only have about 4 more minutes left. So we're going to move on to the next slide. So in my current position, I've been with HUD for about 8 months. I'm the Multifamily Asset Management Division Director. So specifically, we service the FHA multifamily mortgage insurance programs, the Section 202 and 811 capital advance programs, and the Section 8 project-based programs. So we don't subsidize the individual vouchers per se, we subsidize the entire project with Section 8. So all of a sudden I moved from military planning to facilities, what I call facilities management planning, to being a houser. So under my leadership, we began several regionally led process improvements due to extreme staffing shortages we're experiencing. So we started working on management occupancy reviews, looking at how we can do those differently. Management occupancy reviews are used to ensure that owners and agents comply with requirements under regulatory agreements, mortgage, management certifications, housing assistant payment contracts, and other relevant business agreements. It's the way that we keep our owner agents accountable to providing safe and sanitary housing for our most vulnerable Americans. We've also started a funding, contract renewal, and vouchering working group so that we can look at how we can streamline and make sure that we're ensuring our owners and agents are getting paid timely so they can, again, support our mission, which is to provide safe and sanitary housing to our most vulnerable Americans. Annual financial statement reviews, how can we look at those more efficiently to ensure that our projects are viable and are financially supported well, and also looking at our project rental assistance contract renewal review process to ensure that when folks are needing to renew their contracts, that we're doing it timely. We need to improve that, as well as keep in context the fact that we're under a constrained environment with resources. So my last slide is some unsolicited advice and also an opportunity for a shameless plug. So the unsolicited advice is be creative with leveraging your planning education toolkit. You'd be surprised how the conglomeration of all your experiences can open doors to be able to add value in a position that you wouldn't traditionally think people would be looking for you to work in. Your master's degree is a strong foundation, and master's in urban planning education to me was fundamental to me being able to lead the group that I'm leading right now here in housing and to do all the work that I've done so far in the last 11 years. And the shameless plug is, I have a lot of vacancies, guys. Please consider applying to HUD multifamily in San Francisco. Please take a look at usaidjobs.gov. There's going to be a hiring bonanza this summer. Please apply, and if you don't make it past the computer sort, please try again. And if you're new to the process of applying for federal government jobs, I highly recommend looking into getting a resume writer to help you, because the path isn't as linear as non-federal government jobs. So that wraps up my presentation, and I am going to hand it over to James. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenna. And I'm going to go ahead and load my presentation. Just one moment. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Again, I'm James Garland, and I'm with the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to just give you a couple of perspectives and insights about planning at the federal level, but from a transportation perspective. Just a very quick roadmap for the next 15 or so minutes that I'll be able to spend with you all. I'll just talk about who I am, where I work, what planning for transportation looks like from the federal perspective, some insights and perspectives, and then some emerging trends and hot topics in transportation planning that we're working on. It's always interesting to chat with people, especially colleagues, because the first couple of questions are, gee, I didn't know the federal government had planners in any capacity. And as Clark mentioned in the beginning, we are definitely barred from those two famous things of land use and decision making. So we are an oversight and stewardship role for the most part in terms of what we do in helping the public and with our key practitioners and stakeholders. But it's also interesting because leaving from graduate school and getting a master's, folks thought I was completely crazy and nuts for going to work for the federal government. But here I am 17 years later. No, I've not had the same job for 17 years, but I've been able to really work, and as Jenna mentioned, move through a variety of different roles. So I've worked in 4 different field offices with 3 different modes, mainly transit, highway, and with the Secretary's office. And I've also had 3 different headquarters stints with those modes. My undergrad is from Dillard University, which is in New Orleans. So very happy to hear Eric's earlier presentation and kind of an ode to New Orleans, and always a good place to study. But there I received my undergrad in urban studies and public policy, and then followed that with a graduate degree in urban planning from Columbia. Right now, just a couple of quick things. I'm chairing our mega region subcommittee, and also I'm a committee member for TRB's Metropolitan Planning Policy and Process Committee, and then I serve on a board for one of the University Transportation Centers at University of Austin, and then a couple of just general affiliations. I need to finally sit for my AICP exam, so some of you can shame me into questions if you would like to take that opportunity to do so. But I've also been working with the Dwight D. Eisenhower Transportation Fellowship Program for a number of years, and I'm a member of COMPTO. Within USDOT, just a very quick 40,000-foot orientation. There are 11 modes within USDOT. Federal Highway is just one of those modes. It is one of the larger modes. But overall, those 11 modes encompass about 55,000 people. Although we're headquartered in D.C., we have offices throughout the country. Federal Highway Administration, pretty much our role is, and primary mission is overseeing the Federal Aid Highway Program, which provides federal financial assistance to states. The best way to explain it is the next time you're driving or in an Uber or a Lyft ride, you may be in a construction zone or an area that has maybe an entrance sign that says your federal tax dollars at work, and it may show a percentage or a specific dollar amount. That's the easiest way that I tend to explain it to people in terms of our relationship with states and how we provide that federal role and oversight responsibility. My specific unit within Federal Highway is within the Office of Planning, Environment, and Realty, and within that, I am the team lead for the Transportation Planning Capacity Building Program. We roughly have about 7 staff here in DC and 1 remote staff, and we do a variety of things related to training and technical assistance, which I will talk about in just a moment. A lot of what we do within my role is joint with Federal Transit Administration, which is one of my former employees, and I had a lot of experience that was mentioned in my bio in terms of leading major capital investment projects on the transit side. Federal Highway and FTA have a very unique and special relationship. Our regulations in 23 CFR and codified by law in 23 U.S. Code really require us to have a special relationship in terms of carrying out the duties related to oversight and stewardship for the statewide and metropolitan planning process. So those regulations are joint. We work directly with FTA on a variety of things. They also have other responsibilities related to grant making and transit agency oversight responsibilities and auditing that's slightly different. But when it comes to the planning process, we do have those joint things that marry us together on the regulatory side, which is very unique. But overall, both agencies work together to really assist state DOTs, metropolitan planning organizations, and other local planning practitioners. And then we also have a heavy arm on research. This is just a screenshot of my team's website, and I highly encourage folks to take a look at it. It's www.planning.dot.gov, and this is pretty much the bread and butter of what my team does. So we work directly with the Oversight and Stewardship team. They're primarily responsible for policy making and oversight on the transportation planning regulations. We then work with the policymaking side of the house to really look at where there may be gaps within learning and development and come up with training and technical assistance. So our role is not only a little cool in terms of being able to design specific trainings and also touch a number of different topics, but you have to have a very specialized skill in knowing and really understanding the planning process, where there may be pitfalls, being able to understand and articulate past legislation, current policies and legislation and guidance, and then also be able to have a forward-looking lens to really think about where we're going for the future. So this is just a quick screenshot. We have a number of publications that are on the site. One of the things that we're very happy about is that this website looks this way today. And for the next couple of weeks, but it's getting a complete overhaul and facelift. The URL will not change, but we're undergoing a very strategic and redevelopment process that's very time consuming that we've been doing for the last year. But we'll have a whole new rollout later this summer, which we're very happy about. So just to kind of take a step back from those that don't necessarily work in the transportation planning space and to provide just a little bit of context, this is a continuous process that really looks at information tools, but really at the heart of it, public involvement. And the overall goal is really looking at improving system performance throughout the transportation system. So there are a lot of influences within that, really looking at choices among the public in terms of alternate modes and strategies, but really helping decision makers think about what policies and investment priorities work best in their local context. There are a lot of considerations that really abut these particular influences and the process itself. Land use, which is really driven by state and local laws, air quality standards, which we work very closely with the Environmental Protection Agency on, the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as ADA, and then Title VI and environmental justice and areas related to civil rights. So transportation planning overall is decentralized. We do not force decisions down from the federal level onto anyone. So the decision making is really at the local level. There's a 3C process that's been around for quite some time and really codified and really baked into the foundation of everything that we do, which really emphasizes a continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive planning process. And then we get into some major policy and planning issues, which a lot of what my team does on the capacity building side is really looks at where the regulations and guidance state certain things must be done, the should and the shalls that are included throughout the regulatory process, but then really massaging that into, okay, now what could be some innovative practices that maybe are happening in one portion of the country that a similar size scope state or MPO may be able to benefit from in terms of replicating, et cetera. So a lot of what we do is really look at some of those major policy and planning issues and trends and connect people together through peer exchanges and other face-to-face venues. Transportation planning is really the process of establishing a vision. So if you can think from a futurist standpoint in terms of what things should look like from a theoretical standpoint or even academic exercise of long-range planning, or really thinking about a more comprehensive view of the transportation system, this is definitely an area that you'd be interested in. Looking at demonstrating impact or influence with respect to demographics, thinking about opportunities and challenges of the future, again, kind of getting back to the futurist standpoint and long range, but also short range planning. And then thinking about financial plans. So you can dream up all of these different cool ideas, but of course, you always have to think about what financial constraints lie, and there always will be financial constraints in not only the environment we're in now, but I think throughout the process and throughout the history of the transportation planning process, it's always been a key issue. And then implementation. How do we really work to get projects out there and on the ground? This is just another visual that's really helpful to really understand how some of those visioning and goals process percolate through and really get into prioritization of projects and strategies and how that develops some of the key transportation planning products. I didn't want to make this too much of a regulatory exercise of all of the plans that come out of the transportation planning process, but we do have on planning.dot.gov if you want to do more of a deep dive. There's our briefing book for transportation decision makers. It's our #1 downloaded publication that's available. It is available online right now, but we'll have it in hard copy later this summer. And I highly recommend that if you're interested in the process to take a look at that, because it gives you a lot of comprehensive information about how the transportation process works, and then how some of those areas on the periphery, such as fiscal constraint, environmental issues, data, safety, public involvement, and economic development really play into the development of those plans and project development processes. So just a couple of roles at USDOT. We set policies and guidance on planning issues, again, through 23 CFR and through 23 U.S. Code, really for the statewide and metropolitan planning process. And then we review and certify that those planning activities are happening in accordance with the regulatory process that's been laid out by Congress. We work very closely with state DOTs. They develop the statewide transportation plans and programs. So again, we just kind of provide the framework and the policies and the guidance. The states actually develop the plans and the programs. They coordinate with metropolitan planning organizations in their state and in sometimes neighboring states where you may have closely knit jurisdictions that touch, and then planning for non-urbanized areas. And then MPOs, or metropolitan planning organizations, are another arm that we deal with that really look at plans and programs from a metropolitan perspective and also coordinate with neighboring MPOs and with neighboring states if appropriate. So all of that translates to just one example that I wanted to show that we've been really doing from the capacity building and within Federal Highway related to mega regions and national economic partnerships. And this is just an infographic and that we've been able to really show the importance of why jurisdictions should coordinate, not only within their metropolitan area, but on large, complex transportation issues such as freight, environment and air quality, congestion, and safety. Some of those are just issues are just too complex and large to really deal with in a siloed approach. So we've been working to really show the benefit of coordinating not only from an issue perspective, but also from a corridor perspective. And I thought this would be a nice graphic in which we looked at, in this case, we brought together 4 state DOTs from California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. The main impetus was looking at freight and goods movement out of the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, all the way through the Port of Houston, and how to really enhance coordination along the Interstate 10 corridor. So we looked at population, we looked at gross domestic product. We also looked at the percentage of urban population versus rural, because that corridor is not all entirely urban, as you can see. It has a vast amount of rural areas that it covers as well. But then we also looked at freight. We also took a snapshot at freight bottlenecks within that particular area, and then freight shipments in terms of by dollar value, in terms of millions, and also by tonnage. So that's a very interesting project that we've been working on. And if you're interested in more information on mega regions or mega regional planning, definitely contact me and let me know, and I'd be happy to share additional details. Similar to Jenna, just kind of some insights and perspectives to kind of land the plane on this presentation. There's several paths to planning. You can stay on the technical side, or you can get into planning leadership. I've been in leadership for the last about 5 or 6 years, specifically within this role that I'm in now. And there's no right or wrong answer. There's a lot of different avenues that you could really focus on from the federal perspective. But I think one thing that really kind of is required, no matter if you remain technical or get into leadership, is really staying abreast of trends and really thinking about continuous learning. So figuring out what works for you, if it's joining special committees or volunteer work that's related to planning, attending the APA National Conference or other areas. I highly recommend that. That's a way to stay fresh and really stay abreast in terms of what's happening within the transportation planning arena. And then also networking. I think we can never do enough of that, but that's another critical area. And then flexibility and resilience. Remaining nimble. As I mentioned, I worked in 4 different field offices. I've moved around. I think I've had at least 11 moves over 17 years, which is a lot. Luckily, I've not moved in the last 10 years. So being able to, chart your own path and really think about how you can commingle a lot of your experiences will really go a long way. And then just very quickly, some emerging trends and hot topics and things that we're working on. That's also available on planning.dot.gov. Scenario planning and planning for uncertainty. Social equity is a hot issue. You just saw a snapshot about our mega regions project that we're working on in terms of mega regional planning. And then as state DOTs and MPOs adjust to a performance-based planning and programming process, really looking at performance measurement and also target setting and the impact on the transportation process. And then last but certainly not least, connected and autonomous vehicles, which is all the buzz at this point. And a lot of people are talking about what the impact will be on the planning community from a small scale all the way through a statewide perspective and beyond. So there's no shortage of things that are happening in terms of hot topics and trends in transportation planning. And I encourage you to stay in touch. There's my contact information. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Reilly, and Reilly will get into his section of the presentation.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Reilly Abbott. I'm a innovation advisor with USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. I want to give you some background on USAID and where I sit within the agency, and then give you a little bit of a perspective on how I approach planning within international development. I'll be referring to social innovation and stakeholder engagement throughout this presentation, and I'll be using terms such as system. And I just want to let you know that when I use that term, I'm talking about the relationships between a number of different actors as they relate to a development challenge. So just want you to keep that in mind as we go along. So I'm pretty new to USAID. I joined in September of 2018. Prior to that, I've worked for international NGOs on strengthening civil society, engaging in research and learning on how USAID can better partner with local organizations. And prior to that, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in El Salvador. I hold a master's degree from George Washington University and a bachelor's degree in geography from the University of St. Thomas. And I need to let you know that the views expressed here are mine and don't necessarily represent USAID. USAID is the lead government agency working on international development. And our mission is to end extreme poverty by promoting resilient democratic societies while advancing US's security and prosperity. We work in over 100 countries around the world, and we employ around 9,000 people in that work. Within USAID, I work within the US Global Development Lab. This is an innovation hub within the agency that was created in about 2013, and we're tasked with integrating science, technology, innovation, and partnerships within USAID's work globally. I want to highlight too that a lot of what we do is to support a developing country's journey to self-reliance. So a lot of what we do is work directly hand in hand with governments in developing countries, regional governments, civil society organizations, and other organizations in developing countries. And we focus a lot on capacity development and working hand in hand with these organizations so that we help them on their journey to development and can work together to end the need for foreign assistance and development. Within the Global Development Lab, I work for a team called Innovation, Design, and Advisory. We work directly with teams inside the agency and help them primarily with activity design, project design, and strategic planning. On the right side, you see what is referred to as the USAID program cycle. So within that middle circle, the white circle, you can see that a lot of what my team does is support teams think about how to engage local actors in the design of projects, and then at a more granular level, how to design specific actions or activities. I want to provide you some insight as to what I do with the agency, and a lot of what that is embedded in systems thinking. So that is, how do different actors relate to a given development topic. I'm going to sort of go through this, and it'll be couched in this framework here, where it's sort of adopting a mind shift to focus on the relationships between actors on a development topic. We do that through an assessment or a mapping of a system. And then what we do is work hard to bring those actors together to promote dialogue among them and to find collaborative solutions to the complex problems that they face. And then we do consistent monitoring and evaluation throughout implementation to make any needed adjustments or adaptations during an implementation. So what this looks like, this is a project I've been working on recently, is mapping. So we look at a development topic, and in this case, there's an HIV/AIDS epidemic, which is related to a drug addiction problem. Unfortunately, I can't share the location of this problem, but I'm going to refer to this. But so there's drug abuse taking place in mines. These would be natural resource extraction mines. And among that, there's a high usage rate of needles and opioid drug use. Drug sharing is leading to an outbreak of HIV/AIDS and other infectious diseases. So what we'll do to look at the relationships is engage local stakeholders in a mapping process. We'll look at this issue or this problem from a number of different perspectives. And after a series of workshops, what we'll do is eventually come and develop a pretty messy map, as you see right here, that looks at a system and all the interrelated dynamics that are taking place. I'm going to zoom in here and show you a little bit about the HIV/AIDS system map. So you can see some of the problems at the center of this and the related dynamics and how they interact. So on the right hand of the screen, you can see that HIV/AIDS is a reinforcing dynamic drug addiction is a reinforcing dynamic that's contributing to HIV/AIDS. If we zoom in on the drug addiction side, you can see there's corruption, low willingness of authorities to address drug issues, contributing to proliferation of drug dealing, which also contributes to or reinforces drug addiction, which damages livelihoods, and on. So what we'll do often is go through a series of workshops with local organizations to map out these issues and then apply another filter on top of this, or another stage in this process where we think about who is affected by these different issues that we're looking at, who's working on these different issues, who has resources and information to provide in addressing these issues. So that we'll do is, once we've sort of revealed all of the actors, all of the stakeholders in a given system, we'll convene those with whom we have trust, and we have some form of relationship already, into a steering committee. And we'll do some additional mapping with them, but also work with them as a proxy to engage a wider system of actors. And then I'm just coming back from one of these, but then we'll involve all of the actors that we've mapped, and in this case, drug addiction, into a collaborative planning process we refer to as a whole system in the room. And so this is the technique for involving folks in the process of defining a broad context and within which they're working. So what you can see on the screen is participants mapping out their lived experience, the information they have, and some of the major events from their lives as it relates to drug use in the place where they live. And then participants will undergo a series of exercises where they're also mapping out the current trends affecting the problem, and then they'll envision a future that they'd be willing to work towards. The workshop closed with a refining technique where we try to find a common ground, that these would be things that everybody can agree to moving forward. And these are technical elements, policies, or proposals that people, again, a very diverse network here, looking at religious actors, government actors, civil society, those who are drug users themselves or former drug users, a number of different people coming together and building a common ground, and then taking that further to develop action plans to support that work. So from there, what we do is sort of try to connect the different actions that come out in a collaboration framework where we have teams building or working on their action plans, and we sort of serve in that secretariat or work with a local organization in a secretariat or core team role. We're supporting them during implementation, providing consistent updates to everyone, allowing information to flow, and trying to build an action network as we go forward. We'll also try to link technical assistance, provide some small grants for funding to support those action plans, use different social change techniques or methodologies like advocacy, behavior change communications, or education, a number of different techniques depending on the actions and the teams that come out of these workshops. And then what we're trying to do with this approach is build a network of actors that are communicating with one another, hold some level of trust or relationship among each other. So what we try to do is use a social network analysis technique to monitor the health of those relationships, so that over time, what we hope to find is a less decentralized, or I'm sorry, a less centralized network, one where stakeholders that previously may have been at odds or adversaries or were simply unknown to one another have built a relationship, are sharing information, and have continued to build on actions to support that common agenda that we worked hard to create. So that's kind of a quick run through of some of the work I've been doing with USAID since September. And I look forward to taking this forward. I'd be happy to share any additional thoughts or engage in conversation with you. But thank you for your time. And with that, I will turn it back to Clark to take us through any question and answer.
Thank you, Reilly. Actually, I think Christine's going to take over. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll take over. Thanks. Yeah, we have a ton of questions, folks. You can still type your questions in if you'd like to, and we can see how many of these we can get to. First question is for Eric. How often do you work with the local municipality jurisdiction, if at all required, for the subject property?
Okay, well, I guess this is referring to my current work. I would say in terms of the work in, for example, Arlington National Cemetery, we certainly have to engage with the Arlington County, the surrounding county, and that is a process that's still being vetted. We're actually at about the 65% submittal stage of a 400-page real property master plan. With regards to some of the other projects, some of the intrinsic basis of the research and the analysis itself is its impact on the surrounding community, such as the traffic impact studies. Though I have to concede that right now the work at West Point, for example, the academic buildings upgrade plan, is not really a project that involves a great deal of surrounding community engagement. I mean, these are the biggest engagement, the surrounding, the oversight is coming through the National Environmental Policy Agency, the NEPA process that will look at historic and cultural resources. So I would say whether or not there is a municipal oversight depends on the scale of the project, but regardless of whether that exists, there is always oversight, particularly in regards to projects in the DC area where we have such entities as the National Capital Planning Commission and the Commission for Fine Arts.
Thank you. We'll stick with you for a second. And there is another West Point question regarding funding. Is the current funding on West Point facilities being held up to be diverted for the southern border wall? Was this taken into consideration in those plans?
That's an interesting question. I am not aware of that having an impact on that project per se, though that is possibly going to be relevant. It is MILCON related funding, the military construction, and so that is actually potentially holding up funding for another project that we're engaged in at another military installation in the DC area, where there's been already some dedicated funding for a certain unit to expand within that installation, and it does look much murkier because of some of the considerations at the southern border. I don't believe that is going to have as much bearing with the renovation projects at West Point at this point. It is possible, though, that could change within another couple of years, because the MILCON funding is much more annualized, and with each successive year that this project is projected into the future, the likelihood of the funding diminishes merely because we can't anticipate future needs as well.
Okay, thanks. And then we'll, one last question for you while we have you on here. Arlington National Cemetery question. What are the options being developed to add capacity to the cemetery without negatively impacting the current character that has been developed over several decades? And secondly, has a mausoleum be considered, has a mausoleum been considered?
I'm glad somebody asked that, because that's a chance for our team, and I'll admit even me specifically, to get really creative. And there are a variety of different strategies. The physical expansions can only take place for so long, and those are nowhere near as controversial as the eligibility changes, which are incredibly contentious, because a huge number of people are coming with the anticipation that they will be able to be buried at Arlington, and with eligibility changes, that may not be the case anymore. But the reality is we do not want this to be a closed cemetery. We don't want it to ever be fully at 100% capacity and merely a tribute. And so technological innovations that we are seeking, really the second question is an answer to the first. A mausoleum is among those. We're looking at creative ways to integrate potential underground mausoleums that are built into hillsides that will be subtle and seamless and not impede view sheds. We're looking at a considerable incentive for those who choose to be cremated, which by and large the cultural acceptance of cremation is pretty strong in this day and age. Pretty much for all generations up to baby boomers. But those older than baby boomers are not as keen on cremation. And those are unfortunately the ones who are, we're dealing with their burials right now. But cremation is a considerable way of saving space. We already have a lot more columbaria, which essentially operate as above ground mausoleums and are much more kind of structured in almost a stacked formation. Those who've been to Arlington probably know what I'm talking about. They're much more space efficient. And then the last option that we're really looking at are both scatter plots, what you would call ossuaries, where it becomes a common commingled burial ground for the ashes to be scattered on certain areas, to which there can be pretty much unlimited storage. Or even, and this is much more speculative at this point, digital burials, where perhaps in these underground, we could call them catacombs, but underground mausoleums, there is what we would almost call a cenotaph, where the burial commemoration is there and is digital and is much more thorough, but the actual physical burial takes place off-site, which gives a person an opportunity to be honored at Arlington because they are eligible, but does not create the space considerations of an actual physical burial if they're buried off-site. So as you can see, there's a variety of potential solutions we're dealing with.
Wow, it's interesting. Eric, one more question, because it just popped up and this is a good one. What changes have already occurred or are proposed by the current administration to the NEPA process?
Oh, I'm not probably going to be the best one to talk about that. I mean, we're still proceeding along the same standards that we have been for quite some time with the NEPA process. And while I've overseen some NEPA activities, I've never seen one from cradle to grave yet. I will be soon. I'm not aware of any radical changes that have yet had bearing, perhaps because the projects I've worked with are grandfathered in under the old processes. My biggest thinking is that there will probably be less stringent standards put on certain environmental considerations in the years ahead, but I don't really want to speculate beyond that. The projects we're dealing with, we generally, I manage the NEPA process, but the actual on-the-ground work, the nitty-gritty, is usually done with one of our subcontractors.
Eric, thank you. Jenna, we have a couple questions for you. The first one, most important, Did you live in Japan and Hawaii for the work that you did there?
Yes, I did, and actually had a child in Japan, born on the economy in Hiroshima, and two children born at Queens Medical Center in Honolulu. So yes, I was on the ground, living in both places. And that's one of the great benefits of working for the federal government is the opportunity to literally live all over the world, particularly if you want to work for DoD.
Thank you. Next question for you, Jenna. Did you review existing and successful air installation compatible use zone plans before engaging in your related work in this field? And if so, what elements did you employ?
So before I engaged, no. When I worked for Group 70, we utilized the AICU's plans that were provided to us, particularly when we're looking at, we're doing an installation appearance plan in Guam for the naval facility on the southern tip of Guam. And we would utilize the data per se, but I personally haven't been involved in actually creating the AICU's plans themselves. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Next one is for Reilly. The projects that you've worked on, how are they selected or chosen?
Well, right now, as I mentioned, I'm in the unit that sort of faces internally. We have a number of ongoing relationships with different teams around the agency. But I think teams come to us when they're interested in innovative techniques. So this is like when they're interested in a process of co-creation, when they're interested in understanding how they can involve local actors in the co-development of activities or projects. So they typically come to us, and depending on whether we have the bandwidth, we're able to provide support. We also have a mechanism, which means we have access to about a consortium of about 40 to 45 small organizations, as well as larger organizations that can provide support if we're not able to. So they have boutique support in design thinking, systems methodologies, human-centered design, and other types of techniques that we use on my team to work with others to put together projects that fit within the policy and the position where a USAID mission is within the program cycle.
Thank you. James, I think it was one of your last slides, and I apologize, folks, if there's background sound. I'm off site and there's folks moving around right now. In one of your last slides, your hot topics, emerging trend slide, would you include climate change as part of the uncertainty consideration?
Was that a question for me, James?
Yes.
Okay, so I did not include that, and that's by design. So climate change, in terms of the actual, the term itself, is not necessarily one of the popular terms at this point in the administration. So it's been rebranded sometimes in terms of resiliency, and a couple of other descriptors. But what we have been doing, just to keep things moving, if states and MPOs are reaching out and asking for support on those particular topics, we have been approaching them from a sustainability standpoint, but also from a resiliency standpoint. So you may not see climate change right now plastered everywhere, but that's by design. We're still moving forward with a couple of other areas.
Thank you. So I think we've run out of questions, and we're, well, about 10 minutes early. So I think we'll go ahead and close up. So thank you to all of our speakers today for joining us, and for the National Capital Area of APA for sponsoring today's session. Thank you. We will have a recording of this session available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube, and we'll also have a PDF copy available on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time. Bye-bye, everybody.